So we're going to be a little bit more informal, hopefully today. We're trying to get more informal conversations going. The presentations have been awesome, but like informal conversations, planning, triaging issues, discussing. I think there's room for all of it. So today's going to be a little more informal, hopefully. And we're just going to talk about tool deployment issues, hopefully. Alex, did you kind of want to take over, or Marius, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I can start, I guess. We need to review the tool set. I'm talking about main in this particular case, but we also probably need to review tool set across the instances. For example, if you look at the upload data, or whatever it is, get data section on the Galaxy interface, I'm not sure half of the tools that are listed there actually work. So I don't know, should that be something under IUC umbrella? Probably. But, you know, for example, things like get data from EBI, I mean, it hasn't worked for years. I think EBI dropped.
It works.
Does it?
Like I've used it since we had some reports
Well,
that it changed recently, and it works.
Does Yeastmine work? Does modern code work? Anyway, I guess it's literally.
I mean, some of this speaks to, like Alex M. Talked about this at some point about like having, in addition to having tool tests, having like an end-to-end driven test framework. Alex was talking about adding some CI for Anvil specifically, where it's more than just an isolated tool test, but it's a test within the Galaxy. A live Galaxy instance. I mean, has anybody done anything like that?
I mean, Oleg is working on, I mean, the Selenium test can be run on an external Galaxy server, right? And so we have a framework for doing this. We run it on the Docker suite for Bjorn's Docker images, and it could be run on any sort of production server. I think it's a matter of going through and categorizing which tests we expect to run, and then building tests we want for the components we want to target. I think hopefully at some point here, Oleg will talk about his work, but he is actively working on end-to-end browser testing on Galaxy.
I've seen he opened a PR with all the Selenium tests broken down, targeting external servers. So that would be one thing. The problem is, I don't think they would test the data source tools. So the tools that Anton mentioned, they're all data source tools. And the problem with them is that they interface with external resources. So then, and not really in a testable or easily testable way.
We could write Selenium tests for that, couldn't we? What would be the issue there?
I've never written a Selenium test, so you're probably right.
I think it could work just fine. I mean, there's a Selenium test in there that interacts with Jupyter, for instance. You know, launches an IE and then interacts with Jupyter. So I don't know why it couldn't interact with pretty much any server.
Well, there are two issues here. I think before we write tests for our tools, we need to review the tool set, because there are lots of tools we just need to get rid of. So we don't have to write tests for them. And what is the best way of doing that? Because that needs to be synced across main instances. So essentially what we've done with Alex last week is that it was basically a Google Doc with tools, and we just, you know, mark them in green, keep, or red, get rid of. So that,
okay, I'll want to talk to Alex about that too.
We could probably easily write some queries to find out the last time most tools were accessed and actually used, right? And we might find many that haven't been used in a while. Right?
GXadmin has that actually.
Yeah.
well, yeah.
I mean, along those lines, a report of what tools are very popular would also be really, really helpful.
Björn is asking if we can activate the chat because he's on a bad connection.
That's John, you're the god.
1 second. I don't see, where do I see do that? Meeting.
But I think we started the horse, we settled the horse backwards here because the get data tools are the special tools. And I think for the majority of tools that we want to sync between EU and .org, that is far simpler to test. But we need to exclude those tests that can't run. So I guess John has opened one PR that lets you manually annotate them. And I think the counterpart would also be useful. I think we can probably figure out when we parse a tool whether it accesses any data tables, because I think those are never going to work against the live instance. So that would reduce the noise in testing, and when the tests work, we can say whatever we deploy from everyone we trust. So I think that would be something that would be super worthwhile. And I think another thing for deploying tools en masse is that we settle on a common way to annotate resources. So Use Galaxy EU has this really cool YAML file. And I think we have something similar. I guess Nate can confirm or deny, but we have something similar. But if this thing is the same, we could host that centrally as sort of, we know these resources work because what usegalaxy.org is doing is we have a lot of custom dynamic rules. They are code, and this kind of code is prone to not work. And we need to write that for every instance. And that's, I mean, for the majority of tools, that's not a good idea. We just want to share that. Maybe even give tool developers a chance to sort of annotate that already in the tools. I think if we had that, it would be much easier to just say, we install everything from IUC, Dev Team, Björn, Galaxy P, all the places where we can assume that somebody has looked over the code.
Can we start by establishing some kind of a committee that would review tools?
So I've been working with Simon and Bjorn on reviewing the common tool set and tool panel sections. I'd be willing to serve on that committee if asked.
Yeah. So that should be definitely made up from IUC people.
So what would this committee do?
We'll start with a list. It's a list of all tools, as Dan suggested, with lists of last access, preferably also how many times it's been used in some period of time, say a year. And with that list, we'll just go down and see and cross some of these tools out. For example, we have entire toolkits that probably need to go. For example,
they don't cost us anything, and if we do that, we lose the reproducibility. I think that's key of what we do. So without the tool at least loaded, so we can block execution, but without the tool loaded, we can't sort of display what the parameter belonged to, and you can't load up a workflow and look what it did. So I think that would be, I think it's more important that we get the new tools in.
We usually don't remove things unless they're broken. We just hide them. So.
Well, hiding would be a good start, but my feeling is that many of these tools have never been used, and especially in workflows. I mean, if you look at some of the tool sets, such as this one that Webb Miller wrote,
yeah, the genome diversity was going to be my example, right? They're like all broken.
Be used because nobody knows how to use it.
But there are bug reports for it, so people clearly try to use it.
Right.
Yeah, that's the point, right? Is we don't want them to. And every time that they send in a bug report, Jen's like, don't use this tool. But that's terrible. I mean, they shouldn't even be there. Nobody should be trying to use them.
this is, I'm
Which
actually,
ones are they? Can we just hide them? Why is
yeah,
this?
hiding them is fine. But
Yes,
this is,
that's like a painful process. We need a better way to do that.
But I think there's, so, you know, assuming you're going to keep adding more and more tools, it's really, you're going to keep having this, you know, annotation and organization problem, right? So I think that's really what you have to solve, right?
That was going to be my point as well. Like, we don't necessarily want to decrease the number of tools. We just want to make it so when you go to that tool panel, you're not like, you know,
Yeah.
I can't do anything with this. What do I do with this?
Too much stuff to
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, at this level, we need to get creative. Like having a committee look at this was not. I mean, I'm critical that this is going to make a big difference.
well, there are two issues.
I mean, this needs to be something more like, okay, these are the topics, these are the inputs. This, I mean, something more towards what Anoop and Björn's team was working on, sort of the prediction, what you may want to do, or I don't know, have some sort of guides or toolboxes or things like that. But
Another thing to
annotated
consider,
tools is a good idea.
another thing to consider is also that everyone that wraps a tool might not necessarily know which tools are best, or, you know, so you need to have some sort of knowledge about the quality of the tools and what things you want to do with them.
Right. And I think that even in a committee, that's not likely to be something we can do.
Well, I just mean if you arrange a whole bunch of software engineers to decide which tools to keep, it's not going to work.
Exactly. I don't know, from my perspective, what's more frustrating is the tool is not there. So let's just get everything in that works. And if we know it doesn't work, we hide it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, so for instance, one problem why we can't do this today is we need to figure out which section we want to put them in, right? So we could say we have a, whatever, I don't know how to call this, but like just something where we drop all the tools and then we can have this done today, I think. Right, CVMFS needs to be in smaller chunks, but other than that, like, let's do it.
So I think there are three issues. One of them, which tools should so one issue is that which tools should be in the tool panel. The second issue is how do we tag the tools? And in that we were trying to adopt EU strategy, which allows them to have these multiple faces, RNA-seq, ChIP-seq, and so on. And the third issue is that how we actually leverage these tags so we can change the tool pane per specific application. I'm a little bit more radical than you, Marius, on that. I think we need to get rid of tools actively. While reproducibility is certainly a problem, but unfortunately, we need to sort of have Apple approach here. You know, after some time, these old laptops are no longer maintained. You know, and Apple actually charges.
You've been living with like having to see these bug reports. If we were actively hiding them, we wouldn't lose any reproducibility, and you wouldn't be frustrated by this, I think.
We could also consider adding another state.
Our whole ethos is very anti-Apple, right? Like that can't be our reproducibility is what we do. Sorry, Dan.
As long as it doesn't kill us, that's fine, yes.
So I mean, if certain tools become extra problematic, we could set them to like read only or view only, right? So people can't execute them, but they could look at them and all the details would show up when you review stuff, right?
Can I suggest it might be worth just adding a depreciated attribute to the tool tag in the XML wrapper, and that can trigger all sorts of UI messages, as well as
you would need to change the tool. I mean, it's a good idea, but you would need to change the tool to do that. So yeah, I guess we're more gravitating towards a central place where you can dump this sort of annotation at any point in time, so that you know.
Yeah, and so the annotation is added or removed with tool revisions. So each revision of a tool can be depreciated rather than the entire revision set. And then for the tool panel labeling and sections, that should be informed by the EDAM topics, operations, and whatnot.
I think we should all agree that on the tool panel that users first see, everything there has to work. It has to be current. And then, and I like this idea about sort of tagging things that are deprecated or, maybe obsolete, but, but I am also not in favor of just removing them entirely. I think we should really strive for this reproducibility, although we should make it kind of, I don't know, the user really has to work hard to get these tools that are now deprecated, would be my suggestion.
I don't know how much to send to the Anvil in this conversation, but I think there's going to be a separate path for what stays on the main instances and what happens on Anvil, just because unless we have the burden of wanting to everything that works on main to be reproducible on Anvil, we can start like quote unquote a clean slate for reproducibility for Anvil. So a lot of the older versions of tools, a lot of the tools that we know don't work, we can just outright remove. And from now on, we have to keep the promise of reproducibility, but we can start fresh in a way. So I think that's going to be, we can do a lot more curating for that than we might do on main because of that.
I agree. Another sort of aspect to it is in the Anvil environment, every user is their own administrator. So if they're really, really motivated to get something installed, there's an option to do so. But by default, everything that comes packaged should just work out of the box.
Yep. So I guess for what I wanted for Anvil, I wanted to have a separate, so I guess the best thing to stay with how Galaxy is doing it now is to just create this usegalaxy.cloud, part of the usegalaxy.star ecosystem. And then on usegalaxy tools, just have this separate list of tools that we deploy by default for Anvil. So a separate conf on the CVMFS, something that we can maintain easily. And then I wanted to have a weekly or so CI that runs the tool tests on everything that comes by default on Anvil, so that we can easily have a list of all the tools there and have something to point to showing that all these tools are still running and still have green tests. And then decide on a way in which we get new tools in. Sorry. So a big thing is that right now, any live instance follows what's on the CVMFS. So even, it's not just when you restart the instance, not when you launch a new one, any live instance, as the user is on it, will change to follow the CVMFS. So keeping that in mind, we need to decide, do we add tools whenever somebody requests it? Do we add tools by default, like weekly, monthly on releases, those kind of things? And I think we're going to have to also just have a kind of written down procedure just to be able to point, this is how we're doing it. Yeah, that's my...
So you can set, so to clarify, you can set isChat2conf false on the root tag of the config file. I will not refresh. So I mean, if that's a concern, if you really don't want it to change, you can do that.
I think we do want it to change. We just don't necessarily want it to change along with main. So if you're adding a tool onto main, we don't necessarily want it to appear on Anvil instances. So that's, I think, the separation of being able to decide strictly what goes on that, so that we have a procedure and something to point for both folks.
Do you really want to bring up do you really want to change it while the Galaxy is running on Anvil? I would think once you brought up an instance on Anvil, it would freeze the tool panel for that instance. That way you make something or change their user experience in the middle. I don't.
Yeah, I'm not set on it. The only reason I thought it might be useful is if we're having some kind of live support, for example, and the user wants something done, to not have to tell them shut it down and bring it back up, especially until the Bro team adds the being able to relaunch a Galaxy, because right now, once you shut it down, you have to start over with a new Galaxy instance. You can't reattach the same one. So until we have that in beta, it'd be good to be able to, give somewhat updates to users. And we don't know that it's going to be like probably months until the attaching is done because they move really slowly.
I would think, I mean, I'm not opposed to having, I mean, sure, I mean, we can have another file. I would think maybe a sort of annotation file might be nicer where you whitelist the tools you want, or, I mean, allow list them, or sort of skip list the ones you don't want. So, I mean, it feels like, you know, I mean, if you do another shed tool conf, there is a separate set of things you need to manage on top of the things we were discussing before, I think. Like deprecated, what category, what resources, and so on. So it feels like that could be, yeah.
There's an additional issue with that second shed tool conf too, where over time it starts accumulating old versions. Generally, if you restart an instance, you probably want that, you know, those old versions. But if you're starting a new instance, you probably only want the latest version of that tool that's installed. And there's no way to really maintain that currently.
Sorry to interrupt the conversation. We've gotten a couple of complaints about the chat, and it seems like the Penn State Zoom is not letting me enable it. So if anybody wants to like write comments in the dev channel in Gitter, then I will like bring them up because I understand that throughput is limited. All right, someone should respond to Nate's comment. Sorry.
Not responding to Nate's comment, but circling back to sections, Marius. What if we just abolish sections completely? We just show item tags and you better tag your tool right or it goes in some uncategorized at the bottom.
I mean, that sounds good to me.
There's
like,
no more ordering.
This could be the new default for
where does it go?
Tools with a given profile version. I would love that. That would make things a lot easier.
How would that work?
I don't know. So for instance, if we look at the tool panel today, would we have sort of good coverage of EDAM terms? But if we do, I mean, I think that would be awesome.
I'd like to also add, this solves the problem of there's when deploying Galaxy, there's early in the workflow, the ephemeris tools, when they extract tools from a workflow, they automatically insert all of the tools into a single category. And then you go to install that. It's just a pain. If the tool wrapper itself can inform the category, it solves a lot of problems on that end.
One had a how would that work question, I think.
Yeah, well, I was gonna ask how would that work with like old existing tools? I mean, I'm not familiar with the ontology exactly, so does everything have to be retrofitted
to the latest version, I guess?
I mean, yeah, you could start with the latest version, or we could ship config for what we know. But I mean, yeah, we could do that, I guess.
So like we'd have to inspect all 8,000 tools?
Well, we can start with the ones that we load up on usegalaxy.org. We know which section they're in, so we can just do a mapping between those.
There are also giant pull requests on tools IOC, adding annotations and metadata for these categories and so on. That is not merged since 2 years.
Okay, and we could abolish the toolshed panel.
That would be great. That makes a lot of things easier.
So just so I understand this right, so you guys want to remove the sections from the tool panel and replace it with tags, or am I off?
Just remove the sections and then iterate over all of the available tags on those tools and display those as a section.
I mean, I think that in the front end, we can mangle that one way or the other. I mean,
yeah,
those things can look like the sections that are there now. I mean, I guess we have to
Okay.
look at how we want to do that. But and the nice thing is also, if you want to have things in multiple sections, that's much easier that way, I think, than what you would have to do today, which is
Yeah,
have things
exactly. It's a
multiple
good point.
times.
So is the implication, I guess, that all galaxies would have a consistent
Yeah.
ordering? How does that work for niche galaxies, where it's like, instead of having tools as like mapping, you want to have RNA versus chip, for example, and have everything that goes into an RNA-seq tool in one category?
Yeah, it doesn't fit so well with the, I want it to look like this as much as I want to do these operations.
How about just a
blend
mode
in.
setting so that on the UI it can flip between the configured categories versus the EDAM assigned categories?
Yeah, but then we don't get rid of the integrated tool panel and all of the other configuration.
So Björn also suggested that we could go by the Björn suggested that we could also go by the annotation in the shed YAML, so the tool shed categories. That might also be a good sort of default fallback. That would be the least amount of engineering, but it's also the least flexible.
I think that we would, regardless, want admins to be able to, put their own tags on. So I don't think that's a real problem, right? Because you could, you could like have namespaces of tags, like EDAM could be one, and by default you could show all the namespaces, but you could restrict the namespace to just the custom admin ones and set those up. So that doesn't seem to be an issue. I mean, I don't know how realistic this plan is otherwise, but the customization, it could still be wrapped into this.
Why, you said we should allow admins? Why just admins? I've always kind of found it somewhat like a missing feature in Galaxy for a user to be able to arrange their own tool panel.
Agreed. That's why we on EU have the toolbox filters. People want that.
But these are still predefined, right?
Is that right? I mean,
Yeah, they are predefined, but it's better than nothing.
Favorites for users.
What was that?
We also have the favorite tools for users.
But I mean, I guess you could envision a case where a user may want to define multiple different individual toolboxes or something, and you would save them in their preferences, and maybe they switch between different, tool sets, right? And they're all laid out differently. I definitely agree. It makes sense to allow users to sort of do it themselves. I do wonder if, we would have to sort of think about also how to make sure that they're aware of newer things as they come out, right? So that they don't only get stuck with old stuff, right? And since we're talking about sort of recategorizing things, does it make sense to sort of look into making nested tags, nested categories? Because right now everything's like flat, right? And we have sections, but those are just flat too.
I mean, if you take an ontology, you get the nesting for free. Which, yes, nesting is fantastic.
Yeah.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, another idea could be that if you have imported workflows, you might also have some view of the toolbox that just shows you, okay, this tool is in this workflow and so on. But I don't know if that's something that would be useful, or is it just noise on in the panel?
Actually, not only workflows, it would be if you could, for example, look on the tools which were used in that history would also be helpful.
Can we implement tool sharing between users? Is there any way we can implement that?
So you mean allowing users to install their own tools?
And then, if one person installs it, another person can also use that.
Nope. I think eventually, once security concerns are mitigated, we would love to let users install their own stuff. Absolutely.
I think so far we brought up a bunch of thoughts, ideas, whatever. We don't have a single actionable item yet, outcome.
Implement all that. Marius' weekend project, right?
And we could start with, I mean, what Jörn suggested, the toolshed categories, that's as a sort of default section. I think that would already be pretty good.
I think one thing is Julian's working on the tool filters, right? The tool filters, right? So if we have that plumbing in place, one can imagine it's pretty easy just to have the sections as a tag, to have custom tags as a tag, have whatever tags as tags, and just make that another filter. So I think just sort of helping Julian get that work in is, you know, an important action item, because I think that would be the client infrastructure we need to get this done.
For a larger target, you could start using databases like bio.tools to start annotating EDAM topics to toolshed tools.
Pretty sure we have that already.
Yeah, we do.
We're not using it well, but
so there are these two pull requests from IOC, and this is exactly doing that, using bio.tools to annotate tools.
What do we need to do to get that PR merged?
Review. It's more or less a manual review.
And there's the front end work and then there's the back end work. So I really like Alex M's proposal to, you know, have this continuous integration where we could test tools on the back end, see what's working.
so, I mean, ideally, I am not the biggest fan of testing against live instances, even though I understand that there is value in it, because we have a lot of tools that won't really run. Plus, it's sort of you can either test the tool when you develop it and assume it's going to work. If you know you use containerized tests, you assume that it's going to work, versus you have to test every single server you install it on. So that was what I was saying. So one of the reasons why sometimes it works on one server but not on the other, assuming like you use containers and everything, is that we have custom resource allocations. And the way we do those custom resource allocations is not great. So we could like get rid of that. I think there is not much need to test against live instances, other than to make sure the resources are available, but then you don't necessarily need to test all the tools.
None of the 400 some failing tool tests. I mean, what the tool list of failing things, only like 2 of them were because of the resource allocations. The rest were just failing the tests. They mostly test the apples. It's not that the tools don't work, but it's the apples that pass on Planemo but don't pass when tested against an instance.
I want to.
Thank you. Yeah.
Those tools will likely not perform well. I mean, without the resource allocation and stuff set up. Marius, I don't know if you've seen like how CWL does it, but they do allow the annotations of the resources inside the tools with little JavaScript expressions. So it'd be nice if we could, maybe as we've got the biohackathon coming up here, and I know Nicola was asking me a couple days ago about like what projects we could do that would sort of get CWL a little closer to Galaxy, but maybe we've got all this infrastructure for JavaScript expressions now. If we could sort of use that and plug it into the Galaxy tool XML and sort of see if we can get it to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would also fit in that GTU grant that PSU has.
That would be awesome. So maybe over the biohackathon, you and I we can come up with a plan to hack on that. I think that'd be good.
So I also wanted to comment on Alex's remark, which is, I mean, that's great, but that's not true for usegalaxy.org, where the resources are more complicated. You know, I mean, if you don't have complex resource selection, you're not going to run into that problem. And then B, the other thing is dynamic, data tables, reference data that tool tests can stage but I can only stage that if the tool tests drive Galaxy, but the tool test can't drive a live Galaxy instance. So that's sort of A, the manual exclusion of tests when we know that happens, and B, ideally we'd automate that.
So for the resource allocation, we do have a dynamic runner for the Kubernetes runner that does.
I mean,
map-
this is better than what useGalaxy.org uses. So if you go in the useGalaxy playbook and you look at those rules, you go. I mean, I understand it's necessary, but it's
we just have
problem
like
where
tool ID mapped to resource set, and resource sets define CPU limits and requests. And
right,
CPU
but I
memory.
mean, we have some tools that scale with, for instance, reference data size. Right, so that's not something that we have a baked-in solution for.
Yep, that would be good. And we had that problem with, we had set a tool to use like very high resources because of the COVID-19 workflows, but then for normal things, they don't need that much allocation. So being able to dynamically set things depending on inputs would be good.
Is it possible to add tags to the tool wrappers for recommended resources that is not only can it be a static value, but also an expression based on the input values?
I think that's what John suggested. I mean, so the answer is no, not yet, but yeah, that would definitely be good.
Just to push back a little bit on like running tests against live instances. I mean, we still target supercomputing centers, right? Like we still like, and there's different ways to do dynamic tools, and it will be important, but I think that part of the value of Galaxy is it really is that admin configuration piece. So I think it will always be good to, the tool tests running against Galaxy are sort of great, and we should continue to work on making them, now continue to try to solve the reference data issue, whether that's, you know, there's different ways we could talk about that, but I mean, I think it's still good. Yeah. And I just like, I have an open, well, I guess Marius merged it yesterday, but there's a PR for annotating like a tool list. So we can like client side, if you know, like this tool works, but some of these tests are failing on my environment. I'm working on getting that into Ephemeris now, but the backend supports that, and the tool runner that comes with Galaxy Tool Util supports that. So we sort of build up a testing framework that matches your instance. I think is still important. Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely value in it. It's just, it's noisy, the results. And that would reduce the noise.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff I could do to reduce the noise, but keep doing that.
I mean, I'm open to doing something else. I think ultimately the goal is to have something that we can point to say every week that this is still working. And for new tools, like, you know, just, is there a missing container, for example? Like, don't make this tool actually live until the container was built. Not like things like that, which might be part of like specific to the infrastructure, but at least for the Anvil case, like, because we control the infrastructure and the configuration and everything, and we have to do CI anyway. Like we have to do periodic tests to make sure that it's still booting up. So it's not just the tool tests, but tool tests are going to be a part of it.
So regarding the tool tests against live instances, we're actually running tests against Maine and Australia and Belgium and some other servers. But as said, it's very noisy for .org. But in Australia, because they have much smaller tool set, they use it, I think, weekly, and they are at the point where all tests actually pass on their live infrastructure.
We should be less surprised about that.
How do they do that? that seems, I mean, are they already using John's PR, or like, how did they manage that? Or is it just that, they know which one's failing because Jenkins gives you this nice overview?
I don't know.
I mean, yeah. I also hate shed tools, the ephemeris tool, because it doesn't test the local tests. So we should also not just rely on that. We need another tool to test all the built-in tools and stuff. We've got more tool tests than shed tools would run. And shed tools has a bizarre perspective about how to, I mean, it makes sense. It's a tool for installing repositories. So it's got a repository view, when I think the tool testing utility for Galaxy should have a tool ID view. But
I mean, that's in general. I think we need to get away from this shed, repository view. I think that would make many things easier.
But awesome news about AU.
Just in the interest of time, is there anything that basically within the next month or so, is there anything that we can do, like at least establish like what tools are going to be on Anvil? And I guess, I mean, I'm talking about Anvil because it's the use case that went into production, but I think we're just going to do a more generic like Galaxy on the cloud, because ideally we'd have just one thing for Anvil, ITCR, GVL, all of the different deployments. But at least like for me, I think my timeline would be in the next month or so, or like by the end of the year, I want to kind of have something to be able to, once we go into the whole getting into from alpha to beta and then the real release on Anvil, just to have at least the first pass of things to point at, basically. I mean, we can also have the conversation, I guess, with smaller group separately about Anvil and how we're going to deal with that, but just wanted to bring up if there's anything actionable for the next month or so from this conversation.
I mean, John has already pointed out some things that we can do.
Definitely annotating tools benefits everyone, so it's definitely worth spending time on, right?
I don't know if, yeah. I guess sort of a central place to sort of integrate those tests might be a good idea, and not super hard to do, so that you have an idea, okay, like in theory, so we have the tests we run every week against the tool. So that sort of tells you if everything's fine, you can use containers, you can stage reference data, and there's no job problem, these work. So we have that list for all the main tool repositories. It's a bit scattered, so we could possibly post that to something more structured. And that could maybe, I mean, there's always like since we have many thousand tools, there are always a couple tools that are a little problematic. So we could seed an initial list that we know is not going to work, because if they don't work in those tests, I can't see how they would work anywhere else. And then sort of work from the difference of that. I don't know if that's something that would help.
I had a follow-up question for a comment Nate made about it being hard to hide tools. Is that true? Is there a technical limitation that would make it hard to hide tools on main?
I mean, it's basically someone with CVMFS access has to log in, start a transaction, edit the file, edit shed tool conf by hand, find the tools and all instances of the tools, add the hidden attribute to the XML tag, publish the change, probably restart Galaxy because it probably doesn't hide them on a reload. Well, maybe it does, but anyway, that's the process.
You think that
Like I think a better way to do this would be is if you could like have a YAML file in the use Galaxy Tools repo, and then when that file gets modified, it just updates the shed tool conf automatically off of that.
I was thinking
Like
for
no one should have to do CVMFS transactions by hand.
Would it make sense to have a tool exclusion list next to Galaxy? I was thinking for Alex's use case, I brought that up and he had thought about doing something in Helm, but I was thinking that could be something that's just in core. Like you just, here's your tool comp and here's like hidden tools. I mean, especially if we're gonna add tags.
Yes, the only problem is like if you
admin metadata for tools, and one of them could be hidden, one of them could be the tags you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think we generally need more control over the way that tools are presented in the UI. It does have to be compatible with the, and if you want that to also be shareable with other instances, right, then it doesn't really work to put that in CVMFS or have that be part of the shed tool conf or have it be in the install database or anything like that.
Can I suggest something? I'd really like to see better utilization of Galaxy's roles across all the resources. Assigning roles to tools would be really helpful.
Is that for displaying them or is that for allowing access? Or is that both?
Whatever's useful. Definitely access, but does it make sense to display a tool but not permit access?
No, I mean, no, I think the inverse is, my brain's a little scattered, but I was thinking sometimes it makes sense to allow access, but have it hidden, right? For reproducibility or whatever. Or it appears in workflows, but you don't want to see it. Yeah, I don't know though.
I mean, that sounds like an extra layer of complexity if you would want to combine that with an external list like Nate was talking about that has this sort of metadata. So we need to sync what's in the database with an external resource.
Yeah, fetching the initial tool panel would really slow down, and maybe just we could cache that.
I mean, we could tweak that. And
another way to sort of think about that is maybe you could even just assign certain tools to have roles required to run on certain resources, right?
Or just have the whole assign roles to resources, assign roles to tools. You have to have all roles to run.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, the thing is, both of those are doable today, right? The admin can do this if they write some Python, and in both cases, because we have the tool authorization filters and we have the dynamic parameter. I mean, all of those things are dynamic, but you know, coming up with a cohesive story to do that statically is possible. I just don't know if it works because you're going to make a specific set of choices for what that looks like, and I don't know if it replaces the sort of. It will work for a couple of use cases, but I don't know if it works for every use cases the way the dynamic. Yeah, obviously, I have a bias towards these dynamic approaches. That makes things complicated, but.
Well, this might be a rabbit hole topic, but any plans on moving away from XML for the tool confs?
For the tool panel or for the tool XML?
The tool conf XML, the shed tool conf XML, and the tool conf XML.
So the panel?
Not the integrated tool panel, the actual tool conf. I don't know what you mean by the panel.
Not a wrapper, but the tool conf, yeah.
Yeah, not the wrapper, the tool conf.
Yep. I'm not familiar with this language. I get what you're saying now. Yeah, thanks. It might be able to load YAML today, but I don't know.
I think we've baked the XML in pretty hard, but I mean, there's nothing XML-ish that will preclude just having a
for the wrapper. That's true, right? But it wouldn't be terribly difficult to do it with the tool conf, the panel conf.
Yeah. But we do that. So, I mean, I don't think it's possible today, but this would be not a big project to do.
Yeah, that's not hard.
It's not like there's no immediate use for why YAML would be better like today, but for a lot of things, I mean, just in general, YAML is just easier to handle. To be able to change things on the fly on launch, basically, just in the launch command to be able to change configs. And
yeah, and it's also easy to break XML, right? It's a bit easier than YAML.
Something not necessarily related. There's a software company in Holland that generates an index of most popular programming languages every month. So they have the top 20 ranked programming languages and the trends. What was the previous month's ranking? Has it gone up, down with like green and red arrows? Does it make sense to create something similar for the tools in Galaxy? Like we know which tools are becoming more popular, which one are becoming less popular, which are the top 20. I don't know if it's worth it or.
I mean, we have a lot of that data. EU tracked tool usage and tool runs for a long time, but no one ever seemed very interested in it other than publishing numbers in their papers of so many people ran my tool. That was 99% of the requests we got.
Would it be valuable to include I would like to participate in analytics option that phones home and sends tool run whatnot?
I mean, we can collect these anonymously. We don't need to have users opt in.
Sorry, that was an admin opt-in for a deployment of Galaxy.
We have that. It's called Galactic Radio Telescope. It's not very widely used. You can opt in to send all of your tool run statistics to one place. By not very widely used, I mean no one other than EU.
What exactly is it going to measure? Is it going to measure something useful to us, or is it going to measure the proficiency of a given set of users or popularity of a given area in this particular research which requires that particular tool?
Yeah,
the popularity of a workflow.
Those trends, I guess. So for example, if you look at that programming index, like the past few years, the Go programming language is going up and up and up, and like some other languages are keep going down. So,
but you don't make any actionable decision off of this, right?
No, it's just a dashboard that, you know.
And compare.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit apples versus oranges. Go might be super popular, but you are still going to use SQL to query a database.
Yes, you could, you know, assess the usefulness different way. So I'm not. Yes, I'm not saying that if something is becoming more popular, it's necessarily better or anything like that.
And yes, I like the idea. I was just saying that determining what exactly that measures is going to be maybe a bigger problem than we think.
Yeah.
So these would definitely be good to track, because if you even consider like a small example where you have Top Hat, but then Top Hat 2 comes out, right? So you'd want to make sure Top Hat 2 starts getting used and not like things going the wrong way, right? So that could be.
Actually, that's a great example.
Yeah, so
both of those should be deprecated.
That example was so 10 years ago. I know you're still using Top Hat 2.
No. But it's a 1 and a 2, right? So it's easy to.
Yeah.
Looks like we're running out of time. So thanks for coming to this more freeform discussion. Feel free to let Danon or Marius or myself know, was this good? I mean, we got several complaints about the chat feature, and we'll work to get that resolved for the next meeting. But if you have topics like this, maybe we could have a conversation about if there'd be other freeform topics like this we could discuss. I can imagine workflows or UI issues, or there's a ton, obviously.
John, can I ask, so from this discussion, do you see anything that we can use we can add to our quarterly roadmaps?
We should probably have like a fuller conversation. I still think getting Julian's work in needs to be a priority. I think there's a bunch of stuff we could do around tool tagging pretty quickly if you wanted to make it a priority. The YAML filters, the admin hiding things, we could, those are all like small little one day, I mean, not all of them, but there's several little one-day projects I think here that could easily be priorities. I should have taken notes, I apologize. All right, have a good day all. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good one.